My name is Leo Vance, and I'm 31. These days, my world is a modest apartment in Queens where the endless city noise outside my window, the cry of sirens, the rumble of the subway, the glow of neon signs has become a strange kind of comfort. A decade ago, the idea of living like this would have been laughable, impossible even. My upbringing was a world away, spent within the manicured grounds of the Vance estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. It was a place where every surface was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting an image of flawless prosperity that was, for the most part, a carefully constructed illusion. Experience has taught me a hard lesson. Nothing is ever quite what it appears to be on the outside. The saga of the Vance family and the implosion of our billion-dollar energy dynasty is proof enough of that truth. I need to take you back just a handful of years to a time when I was still trapped in that gilded cage. It was a life defined by tailored suits and glittering fundraisers, a place where every handshake was a calculation and every polite smile barely concealed a competitive threat. My grandfather was Arthur Vance, the visionary who built Vance Renewables from the ground up. It became a colossal force in the clean energy sector, a true empire of solar farms and wind turbines with a footprint that stretched from North America to the heart of Europe. Even at 85, Arthur was a titan, a man universally respected with piercing eyes that saw right through you. His deep, reassuring voice could steady any ship, and in his presence I felt anchored, like I mattered. He was the only one in that entire family who made me feel seen, a feeling I clung to because I always knew I was an outsider among my own blood. The Vances, well, you could describe us as a permanent high-stakes chess match where every member is a player, and the only goal is to capture the throne. My father, Richard Vance, held the title of CEO. At 58, he was a commanding figure, tall with streaks of gray in his hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was driven by a relentless ambition, a hunger for more that always seemed to eclipse his actual strategic sense. I can still picture him at the head of the boardroom table, his voice filling the cavernous space. But when his gaze swept across the room, it would pass right over me, making me feel completely invisible. I wasn't his son in those moments. I was just part of the furniture. In his eyes, I was never going to be enough. I wasn't tough enough, wasn't sharp enough to ever take his place. He made a point of announcing it too, often right in front of my colleagues. He lacks experience, he'd declare, his tone delivering the words like a final, unappealable sentence that left me feeling hollowed out in the middle of a crowded room. Then there was my Aunt Catherine, the 55-year-old CFO. She always made me think of a viper coiled patiently in the dark, just waiting for the ideal instant to strike. Her mind was a razor, terrifyingly astute, but she channeled that intelligence into manipulation and intrigue, not into building anything of value. Her primary sparring partner, Uncle Edward, 60, was the director of business development, and a human volcano always on the verge of eruption. The arguments that flared between him and Catherine could suck all the air out of a meeting room. We all fell silent, not just from the raw hostility, but from the shared knowledge that we were witnessing two master strategists mapping out each other's eventual destruction. And finally, there was Aunt Eleanor, the 52-year-old marketing director. She navigated the world with a perfect camera-ready smile and a constant stream of saccharine words. I learned early on that her friendliness was pure theater. A beautiful, hollow mask she wore to conceal her own agenda. Eleanor, meanwhile, was a master of perceived neutrality, carefully playing her siblings against each other to fortify her own standing. She was an expert at walking the tightrope between factions, offering just enough support to both sides to ensure she was indispensable to everyone and a threat to no one. My mother, Isabel, is another matter entirely. She divorced my father when I was just a boy and built a new life for herself in France, intentionally putting an ocean between her and the Vance family's endless turmoil. My only connection to her is a birthday card that arrives with perfect punctuality each year, always containing a few brief, warm sentences. I've never held her departure against her. Sometimes I think escaping was the only sane choice, the only way she could preserve her own spirit, so where did that leave me? I was groomed from birth to take my place in the Vance dynasty, but the legacy felt like a suit that was cut for someone else. I couldn't just be another name on the family tree. I felt a desperate need to create something with genuine purpose, something that wasn't measured in dollars or power. Armed with an MBA from Harvard, I walked into the headquarters of Vance Renewables as a project manager. I was full of revolutionary ideas for the business, from next-generation high-efficiency solar cells to sophisticated smart grid management systems. I truly believed I could be the one to change things from the inside, to transform the company into a beacon of sustainability and genuine corporate responsibility. I was so naive, it didn't take long for reality to hit me like a physical blow. In the world of the Vances, personal ambition was the only god, and the greater good was a sacrifice it demanded daily. My first years at the company were a gauntlet. I vividly recall a board meeting where I laid out a comprehensive proposal for a new line of solar panels, a breakthrough that would make them both cheaper to produce and significantly more efficient. I had poured months into the project, working side by side with the engineering team, scrutinizing every single calculation and design detail. When I concluded my presentation, the room was completely still. For a foolish moment, I thought I had them. I thought they were impressed. Then my father's voice, sharp and cold as ice, cut through the silence. "You actually believe a few figures on a slide can revolutionize an industry, Leo? It takes more than a pretty spreadsheet to earn a seat at this table." A low, mocking laugh came from Catherine's end of the table. Edward just shook his head with a look of theatrical pity, as if I were a child who had told a bad joke. Only my grandfather, presiding from his chair at the head of the long, polished table, met my gaze. His eyes held a flicker of encouragement, but he remained silent, a silent king observing the fray. That kind of humiliation became a regular part of my life. My father never wasted an opportunity to cut me down in front of everyone, branding me a naive dreamer, or his personal favorite, Arthur's little pet. Catherine and Edward's tactics were more insidious. They'd saddle me with impossible tasks, like overseeing an aging wind turbine facility in a remote part of Argentina. The project was a nightmare of failing infrastructure and uncooperative local officials. It felt designed for failure. Their goal was transparent. They wanted me to crash and burn to give them the ammunition they needed to prove I was undeserving of my grandfather's trust. Eleanor, on the other hand, was all smiles and support to my face. She'd put a hand on my shoulder, whispering words of encouragement, while I knew for a fact she was poisoning the well behind my back. The whispers always got back to me, that I was just a lightweight, coasting on the Vance name and my grandfather's affection. God, I tried. I pushed myself to the breaking point, fueled by coffee and sheer stubbornness. I worked through the night finalizing reports, crisscrossed the globe for meetings, and did my best to ignore the constant buzz of negativity. But every day that passed, the feeling grew stronger. I wasn't building a legacy, I was fighting a war against my own family. And it wasn't just me they were trying to destroy. They were constantly aiming their daggers at one another. My father was obsessed with wresting the chairmanship away from my grandfather. His impatience was a palpable force in every room he entered. Catherine was quietly working to consolidate her influence, charming minor shareholders to amass a block of voting power loyal only to her. Edward, ever the deal-maker, was busy forging alliances with outside investors, trying to build a power base independent of the family structure. and Eleanor, the consummate performer, masterfully manipulated the press to position herself as the public, compassionate face of Vance Renewables. I started to question everything. Was this really a family? Or were we just a collection of strangers thrown together by a shared surname and a mutual hunger for wealth and control? My grandfather was my only refuge from that suffocating darkness. Whenever I drove out to the Greenwich estate, he would lead me into his library. It was a sanctuary with floor-to-ceiling walnut shelves and the comforting scent of old books and his signature cologne hanging in the air. He'd settle into his favorite leather armchair with a glass of scotch and transport me back to the early days of building the company from nothing. "We don't just sell power, Leo," he'd say, his eyes gleaming with that old fire. "We sell hope. We're building a cleaner world. But to be a part of that, you have to be tougher than their opinions of you. You have to be stronger than their doubts." He saw something in me that no one else did, or perhaps no one else wanted to see. He truly believed I was the one who could carry his real legacy forward. It wasn't just because I was his blood. He saw in me the one thing the rest of them had traded away long ago: integrity. But even a man as powerful as my grandfather couldn't shield me from the storm that was gathering. As his health began to fail, he started appearing at the office less and less. His absence created a power vacuum, and my family, my father, my aunts, my uncle, began circling his empty chair like predators. You could feel the pressure changing in the atmosphere, the static electricity of an approaching tempest. I knew it was coming, but I was utterly powerless to stop it. The final break happened on a crisp autumn evening. I was in my office in the Vance Tower in Midtown, putting the finishing touches on a 50-page report outlining a groundbreaking smart grid initiative. It was a project I was convinced could redefine the company. I hit send, my email landing in my father's inbox. His reply came back almost instantly, each word a slap in the face. "Not feasible. Focus on your assigned tasks. Stop wasting company time." I just stared at my monitor, the words blurring. The familiar sting of rejection felt different this time. It felt final. It was as if the last ember of hope I had been carefully protecting inside me was finally snuffed out. I pushed back from my desk, walked out onto the small balcony, and just stared down at the river of headlights flowing along the streets below. The city felt a million miles away. New York, in all its vibrant, chaotic glory, felt like it was pulling me toward it. And in that moment, a single clear thought cut through the despair. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't spend another minute of my life trapped in a game I had no desire to win. I was 29 years old, and for the first time I wanted to live a life that was mine, not one dictated by the weight of a legacy I never asked for. I walked back inside, sat down at my desk, and typed out a short, simple letter of resignation. I addressed it to my father, Catherine, Edward, and Eleanor. I didn't send a copy to my grandfather. I couldn't bring myself to do it. It wasn't because I was afraid of his anger or his disappointment. I was terrified that he would ask me to stay, and I knew if he did, I wouldn't have the strength to refuse. The family's response was exactly what I expected. My father was on the phone the next morning, his voice thick with scorn. "What do you possibly think you can accomplish out there, Leo? You're nothing but a coward, a quitter." Catherine and Edward didn't even dignify my email with a reply. But the gossip mill quickly reported back that they were telling everyone I was a traitor who had spit on the family name. Eleanor, of course, sent a long, flowery text message filled with hollow platitudes about respecting my decision and wishing me well. I could practically feel her delight through the screen. With me gone, there was one less competitor for her to worry about. It was my grandfather who summoned me out to the Greenwich estate a few days later. He wasn't angry. There was no lecture, no reproach. He just sat in his library, looking at me with eyes that were weary but still held their familiar, intense light. "You have to find your own way, Leo," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But don't ever forget that this legacy, The good part of it is in your blood. It goes with you no matter where you end up. I could only nod, fighting back the lump in my throat. I promised him I wouldn't let him down. And so I walked away from Vance Renewables and started my life from scratch. I found a job at a small green tech startup based in Queens, surrounded by brilliant, driven people who didn't give a damn about my last name or my family's money. Together, we were building energy management software, tools that helped municipalities streamline their power grids and cut down on carbon emissions. For the very first time, I felt like my work had a real purpose. I wasn't chasing power or profit. I was doing something that felt truly, fundamentally right. I was slowly, painstakingly building a name for myself, one that had nothing to do with the Vances. And while my life in Queens lacked the empty glamour of Greenwich, it had something far more valuable. I was finally free. But I was never naive enough to believe that the story was over. A part of me always knew that my connection to that family was a chain that hadn't been fully broken. With my grandfather growing more frail with each passing season, I couldn't escape the premonition that something immense and terrible was waiting for me just over the horizon. I tried to keep that feeling at bay, to pour all my energy into my work at the startup. I focused on the long, collaborative days with the engineering team and the quiet, peaceful evenings with my wife, Sarah, and our little girl, Chloe. Reading her a bedtime story was an anchor in a world I knew could become a storm at any moment. But every time my phone buzzed with an incoming call from a Greenwich number, my stomach would clench. My body would brace itself for the impact of news I desperately wanted to never hear. And then, on a frigid winter morning, the news came. It didn't come from my father or my aunts. It came from an old friend, and the information he delivered over the phone shattered my carefully constructed world into dust. I was sitting in our small startup office, the weak morning light illuminating the code on my screen. I was in the middle of reviewing a demo for our new energy management software when the call came, and everything changed forever. The sharp buzz of my phone cut through my concentration. I glanced down at the screen and saw the name, Mark, my best friend from college, a guy who now moved comfortably in the city's most powerful circles. The text was short, brutally direct. "Leo, I just heard the news about your grandfather. He's passed away. I'm so incredibly sorry. Call me if you need anything at all." I read the words once, twice, a third time, my brain refusing to process them. They just hung there on the screen, an impossible configuration of letters. A cold vice clamped around my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. The small office, usually a place of comfort, suddenly felt claustrophobic, the walls closing in. Gone? No, it was a mistake. Mark had bad information. It had to be a mistake. We just talked on the phone last week. His voice had been fragile, yes, but still full of that familiar warmth as he asked about the startup, about Sarah, about Chloe. He promised he'd come out to Queens for a visit as soon as he felt stronger. That future, that promised visit was now just gone. How could he be gone? My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone. I fumbled to find my father's contact, my thumb jabbing at the screen. The phone rang once, twice, each tone stretching into an eternity of dread. On the third ring, he answered, "Leo." His voice was clipped, utterly devoid of warmth. It was the same tone he used for a quarterly earnings call, not for his son. "What is it?" I had to swallow past the lump forming in my throat to get the words out. My own voice sounded foreign, thin. "I just got a text about Grandpa. Is it true? Dad, is he gone?" A beat of dead silence hung on the line, a void that confirmed everything before he even spoke. Then the single word, delivered with the flat final tone of a closed ledger. "Yes. Arthur passed away late last night. It was a heart attack." The line went quiet. I waited, my breath held, expecting him to say more. to tell me about the arrangements, that I needed to come out to the estate, that Grandpa had said my name, that he had left a message for me, anything. But there was only silence. And then his voice came again, colder and sharper than before, each word a carefully placed blade. The family has already met. We've decided it's best if you don't attend the funeral. We will handle everything from here. Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. And then he was gone. He just hung up. I stayed frozen in my chair, the phone still glued to my ear, listening to the monotonous hum of the dial tone. Don't need to attend the funeral, don't complicate things. The words echoed in my head, a cruel, nonsensical loop. I was his grandson, the one he loved, the one he had poured so much of himself into. How could they do this? How could they slam the door in my face at the moment I needed to be there most? Panic set in. I called my father's number again. It went straight to voicemail. I sent frantic texts to Catherine, to Edward, to Eleanor. Nothing. Radio silence from all of them. In desperation, I even dialed the number for Henry Shaw, my grandfather's butler of 30 years, a man who had always treated me with more kindness and respect than my own father. When he answered, his voice was strained, formal in a way it never had been before. I am very sorry, Mr. Leo, but I am simply following my instructions. I've been told you are not permitted on the property. The floor dropped out from under me. My own family, the people whose approval I had once so desperately craved, the institution I had naively believed I could reform. They had not just pushed me away, they had erased me. But this was something I could not, would not accept. It wasn't about defiance or picking a fight. It was simpler than that. I had to say goodbye. I needed to stand in that room to see him one last time, to make a silent promise that I would honor his faith in me. I sent a quick text to Sarah, just a few words telling her what had happened and that I was heading out to Greenwich immediately. She called back instantly, her voice tight with concern. Leo, are you sure about this? They've told you not to come. What if they... I don't know, what if they try to hurt you? I knew she was right to be scared. I was scared too. But the thought of not going was unbearable. You don't get it, Sarah, I said, my voice cracking under the strain. He was the only one who ever saw me, who ever believed in me. I have to be there. I don't care what they want. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was resigned. Okay, just please be careful, Leo. Call me the second you know anything. I promised I would, but we both knew the truth. I wasn't just driving to a funeral. I was driving straight into the heart of a hurricane. The drive from Queens to Greenwich took nearly 3 hours, the roads slick with a fresh layer of snow. As I got closer, the Vance estate came into view, its familiar stone pillars and perfectly sculpted evergreen trees rising against the gray winter sky. But today, the place held none of the warmth of my childhood memories. It looked like a mausoleum. It felt like a cold, hostile fortress, a home from which I had been officially exiled. The main gates were open, the long, winding driveway already lined with dozens of black luxury cars. I saw the discreet gleam of Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, and high-end Mercedes. The entire upper crust of society had turned out to pay their respects to Arthur Vance. I didn't care about any of them. All I wanted was to get inside, to have one final moment with my grandfather. I parked my car near the entrance and started to walk toward the house. A large security guard immediately moved to intercept me. I recognized his face instantly. It was Frank, a man who'd been on the estate's security detail since I was a boy. Frank, I said, trying to force a smile that felt brittle on my face. It's me, Leo. I need to go inside. He looked down, his expression a mixture of pity and discomfort. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry, Mr. Vance, I really am. But I have my orders. Mr. Richard and Miss Catherine were very clear. You're not to be allowed on the grounds. A hot surge of anger rushed through me. Orders? This is my grandfather's funeral. You can't keep me out. I tried to step around him to push my way through, but two other guards materialized out of nowhere, forming a solid wall in front of me. One of them placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, his grip firm but not yet aggressive. His voice was low and steady. Please don't make this difficult, Mr. Vance. We're asking you to leave the property now. I looked past them through the open gate and saw the faces of people I'd known my whole life. Board members, business partners, family friends who used to ruffle my hair and call me Little Leo when I was a kid. They were all staring at me now, their heads bent together, whispering. I could hear their thoughts as clearly as if they were shouting them. There's Leo Vance, the disgrace, the one who quit. What is he doing here? Then I saw him. My father was standing near the main doors of the house, impeccably dressed in a black funeral suit, holding court with a small group of men. His eyes flicked in my direction for a fraction of a second, a look of pure glacial indifference on his face. Then he turned his back, dismissing my entire existence with a single deliberate movement. Catherine was standing a few feet away, a faint, smug smile playing on her lips. She was enjoying this, savoring my public humiliation. Edward and Eleanor were nowhere to be seen, but I knew with absolute certainty that this was a united front. My entire family had come together for the sole purpose of erasing me, and that realization cut deeper than any insult they had ever thrown my way. "You can't do this," I yelled, my voice finally cracking. "He was the only one who ever gave a damn about me. You have no right." But Frank just shook his head again, his own voice now pleading. "Please, Mr. Vance, don't make us call the police. Don't make us use force." I stood there, helpless, my breath turning to smoke in the frigid air. It felt like my heart was literally breaking inside my chest. A part of me wanted to rush them, to fight my way inside and scream in my father's face, to tell them all that they were unworthy of even speaking my grandfather's name. But I knew it was hopeless. They held all the cards. They had won. For now. I turned around, walked back to my car, and slid behind the wheel. My hands clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. The tears wouldn't come. I wasn't strong enough to stop them. I was simply too shattered to produce them. The long drive back to Queens was a blur. I felt numb, hollowed out. Memories of my grandfather came rushing back, not in a gentle stream, but in sharp, painful fragments. I saw us in his library, the fire crackling as he told me stories of the company's origins back when he was just a young engineer with a wild dream. Money, Leo, power, they're just tools, he'd said, his eyes burning with conviction. The only thing that matters is the legacy you build, what you leave for the people who come after you. I remembered him taking me to a wind farm in West Texas when I was 12. He'd pointed up at the colossal blades slicing through the air and put a hand on my shoulder. "One day, all of this will be yours to lead, but you have to be stronger than their doubts. You have to be better than their greed." It was dark by the time I pulled up to our apartment building. Sarah was waiting for me right inside the door, her face etched with worry. "Are you okay?" she whispered. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head and pulled her into a hug, holding on tight. Chloe was already asleep. I crept into her room and stood there for a long time, just watching her. Her face looked so peaceful in the soft glow of her nightlight. In that moment, watching her breathe, I felt a flicker of something new take root inside me. I sank into the little chair next to her bed, the weight of it all crushing me. I had lost the only person in that family who had ever truly loved me, and in the same breath they had disowned me completely. I was adrift with no idea what to do, no idea how to even begin to move on from this. Later, I walked into the living room and my gaze fell on a framed photograph on the bookshelf. It was a family portrait my grandfather had given me the last time I'd seen him. The picture had been taken years ago at a summer party on the estate grounds. Grandpa was in the middle, a wide, genuine smile on his face, a rarity for him in those days. I was standing next to him, 25 and full of a naive optimism that now felt like a lifetime ago. My father, Catherine, Edward, and Eleanor were all in the photo too, their smiles looking brittle and forced even then. I picked up the frame, my thumb tracing the outline of my grandfather's face. A fresh wave of grief hit me, sharp and sudden. "I'm so sorry, Grandpa," I whispered to the empty room. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there." My hand trembled and the frame slipped, crashing to the hardwood floor. The glass splintered into a dozen pieces. As I knelt down to carefully pick up the shards, I saw something that had been hidden behind the photograph itself. It was a small, neatly folded piece of paper tucked into the space between the photo and the frame's cardboard backing. My pulse hammered in my ears as I carefully unfolded it. It was a letter, written in my grandfather's unmistakable, elegant script. The first sentence stole the air from my lungs. "Leo, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. But there is something you must know. There is a truth you must hear from me." I sank onto the sofa, the paper shaking in my hands. The soft lamplight seemed to make the ink glow, the words pulsing with a life of their own as they began to tell a story my grandfather had been forced to keep secret. I kept reading, and every sentence was another blow, another piece of a puzzle I never knew existed. "I have left my entire personal stake in Vance Renewables, 51% of the company, to you, Leo. I am trusting you and only you to protect our true family legacy, to protect the values this company was built on, not just the balance sheet. But I am afraid, I fear that my own children, Richard, Catherine, Edward, and Eleanor, are conspiring against me. They have enlisted the family lawyer, Martin Cross, and even the butler, Henry Shaw. They are controlling my life, monitoring my calls, cutting me off from the world. I have reason to believe that the official will they present will be a forgery. This letter, my son, is my last resort. It is my final testament. There is a thumbprint in the bottom right corner of this page. It is my mark. It is how you will prove this is the truth." I looked, and there it was, a faint but perfect fingerprint pressed in black ink. My heart was a drum against my ribs, so loud I was sure Sarah could hear it from the other room. He knew. My grandfather knew they would betray him. He knew they would try to cut me out, and he had planned for it, leaving this secret message for me, hidden in the one gift he knew I would always cherish. I got to my feet, pacing the length of our small living room, the letter clutched in my fist. The raw grief I felt was now mixing with something else, something hot and sharp, a cold, focused rage, a sense of purpose. They thought they could get away with this. They thought they could manipulate an old man, steal his company, and erase his final wishes. They thought they could just throw me away. They were wrong. This was no longer just about me. This was a fight for my grandfather's memory, for the integrity of everything he had built. His words echoed in my mind, no longer a distant memory, but a direct command. "You have to be stronger than what they think of you." Sarah came into the room, her expression shifting from worry to alarm when she saw my face. "Leo, what is it? What's happened?" she asked, her voice gentle. I couldn't speak, so I just handed her the letter. I watched her face as she read, saw her eyes widen in disbelief, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, Leo," she whispered, looking up at me. He left it all to you?" I managed a single shaky nod. My voice was raspy when I finally found it. "But they stole it. My family, they forged his will. They took everything." Sarah squeezed my hand, her eyes locking onto mine, her gaze firm and unwavering. "Then we'll fight," she said. "But you can't go into this alone. We're going to need help." The next morning I called Mark. As a successful venture capitalist, he knew everyone who mattered in New York's legal and financial worlds. We met at a nondescript coffee shop downtown, a place where no one would know my face or my name. I slid the letter across the table to him. His expression grew more and more serious with every line he read. When he finished, he looked up at me, his voice low. "Leo, this is a nuclear bomb. If what your grandfather is saying here is true, this isn't just a forged will. We could be talking about serious criminal charges, but you're going to need more than this letter. It's a powerful start, but it's not enough to win in court. We need hard evidence." Mark made a call, and within the hour I was sitting in the office of Rachel Goldstein, one of the sharpest independent litigators in the city. She specialized in high-stakes, complex inheritance battles. Rachel was in her late 40s with intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a calm, measured voice that radiated confidence. I told her everything. The years of being undermined at the company, the impossible projects, my resignation, being physically barred from the funeral, and finally the letter. I watched her as she listened, her pen flying across a legal pad, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she set her pen down. "This is a formidable case, Leo," she said, her tone serious. "But you need to be very clear about what you're up against. Your family will not surrender this without a war. They have unlimited resources, political influence, and the best corporate law firms on retainer. I need to know. Are you prepared for that?" I met her gaze without flinching, feeling that cold rage from the night before solidifying into something hard and resolute inside me. "I don't have another option," I said. "This isn't about the money. My grandfather trusted me. I will not fail him." A small, knowing smile touched Rachel's lips, the look of a fighter recognizing a fellow traveler. "Good," she said. "Then let's get to work. First, we get that fingerprint authenticated. Then I file a motion with the court to challenge the probate of the official will. But to win, we're going to need more. We need to find proof that the will they filed is a fraud. I suggest we hire a private investigator," she said. I agreed immediately. Rachel put me in touch with a man named Ben Carter, a veteran PI with gray-streaked hair and a raspy voice that sounded like it had been aged in whiskey and secrets. Ben was a man of few words, but the shrewd intelligence in his eyes told me he was the right person for the job. "I'll start with the butler, Henry Shaw, and the lawyer, Martin Cross," he said, his pen scratching across a small notepad. "If they were keeping your grandfather under wraps like the letter says, they left a trail somewhere. I'll also need to get my hands on the will they presented. Do you know who filed it?" I nodded. "Martin Cross. He's been the family's lawyer for decades. He's completely loyal to my father and Catherine." While Ben started digging, I tried to go back to my life. I went to the office at the startup, but I couldn't focus. My mind was a million miles away. Every evening I'd find myself back on the sofa in our living room, reading my grandfather's letter over and over, as if new clues might magically appear in the ink. Sarah was my rock through all of it. She wasn't just my emotional support. She put her skills as a sharp investigative journalist to work, digging into public records and financial filings, looking for anything that seemed out of place. She started making calls to her network of sources in the energy sector, people who had done business with Vance Renewables over the years. What she uncovered was alarming. The company was in a death spiral. Its stock price had cratered, down 60% in just 2 years. Key strategic partners were terminating their contracts, and the financial press was filled with articles openly questioning the competence of my father and his siblings. About a week later, Ben Carter called. He wanted to meet at his office, a cramped, cluttered space in a nondescript building in Astoria that smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He slid a thick manila folder across his desk. "You're going to want to sit down for this," he rasped. I opened the folder. My blood ran cold. Ben had unearthed a chain of emails between Martin Cross and my Aunt Catherine, sent in the weeks leading up to my grandfather's death. They were explicitly discussing revisions to his will. There was more. He had a sworn affidavit from a former paralegal at Cross's law firm. She confirmed that my father and Catherine had paid Cross a massive sum of money to draft and legitimize a fraudulent will. But the final report in the folder was the one that truly stunned me. It was Ben's file on Henry Shaw, my grandfather's loyal butler. Henry hadn't just been reporting on my grandfather's visitors to Catherine. He had placed listening devices in the library, in the study, even in his bedroom. "Your grandfather was a prisoner in his own house, Leo," Ben said, his voice tight with disgust. "They cut him off completely. They were terrified he would get in touch with you or someone else who might interfere with their plan." I clenched the papers in my hand, my knuckles white. A wave of nausea washed over me. "What did they do to him?" I whispered, the question hanging in the stale air of the office. Ben put a steadying hand on my shoulder. "I know this is hard, kid, but you need to keep a clear head. This evidence is a cannon, but your family is going to fire back with everything they have. They will stop at nothing to protect themselves." I called Rachel as soon as I left Ben's office. She agreed we finally had enough to move forward, but her warning was stark. "They will bring in a legal army, Leo. They are going to paint you as a bitter, greedy grandson trying to steal the company. They will attack your character, your credibility, everything. You have to be ready for that." I told her I was, and in that moment I wasn't afraid, not because I felt invincible, but because for the first time in my life I knew with absolute certainty that I was on the right side of a fight that truly mattered. I was fighting for my grandfather, for his legacy, and for my own soul. While Rachel assembled the legal case, Ben kept digging, and he found our star witness. Maria, my grandfather's private nurse during his last few months. Maria was a kind woman in her 50s with weary, compassionate eyes. She agreed to meet me at a quiet diner out on Long Island, far from the city. She took my hand as soon as I sat down, her own hand trembling slightly as she began to speak. "Mr. Vance was a wonderful man, Leo," she said, her voice soft. "But he was so alone at the end. That man, Henry, he wouldn't let him use the phone. Whenever you would come to visit, they watched him like a hawk. I saw him one afternoon trying to write a letter to you. Your Aunt Catherine came into the room and just snatched it right out of his hands. Her eyes filled with tears. He knew what they were planning. He was so worried about you." My own eyes started to burn, but I forced the tears back. "Maria," I asked, my voice thick, "is there any proof? Anything at all?" She nodded, reaching into her purse and pulling out a small spiral-bound notebook. "I kept a journal," she said, pushing it across the table toward me. "I wrote down everything, dates, times, who said what. I had a feeling you would need it one day." Armed with Ben's evidence, Maria's journal, and my grandfather's letter, Rachel filed a formal petition with the New York Surrogates Court to challenge the validity of Arthur Vance's will. The news hit the financial world like a shockwave. The media, already circling the struggling company, went into a feeding frenzy. Sarah used her connections to get the story to reputable journalists, who began publishing articles detailing the company's precipitous decline and the deeply suspicious circumstances surrounding the will. The public outcry forced my family's hand. My father held a press conference at the Vance Tower, standing before a wall of cameras and venomously declaring that I was a shameless opportunist, a disgrace who was exploiting my grandfather's death for personal gain. Catherine went on a morning news show, her face a mask of practiced sorrow, and told the world that I had turned my back on the family years ago and had no right to meddle in their affairs. Edward and Eleanor remained silent, but I knew they were working behind the scenes, whipping up support among the other shareholders, poisoning the well against me. The trial itself was a waking nightmare. Every day I sat in that courtroom and stared across the aisle at my own family, my father, my aunts, my uncle, flanked by their army of lawyers. Their legal team was led by a notoriously ruthless attorney named Jonathan Pierce, a man famous for his ability to demolish witnesses on the stand. Rachel methodically laid out our case. She presented my grandfather's letter, the authenticated fingerprint analysis, the damning emails from Martin Cross, Ben Carter's investigative reports, and Maria's detailed journal. I watched my family's reactions as each piece of evidence was entered into the record. My father's hands were clenched into tight fists on the table, his face a mask of fury. Catherine's expression remained perfectly composed, but I could see a slight, uncontrollable tremor in her hands. Edward leaned over and whispered something to Eleanor, who kept her eyes fixed on her lap, refusing to look at me. When it was his turn, Jonathan Pierce went on the attack. He painted me as a bitter failure, a spoiled brat who had quit the company because he couldn't handle the pressure. He brought out old performance reviews, memos my father had written criticizing my projects, anything he could find to portray me as incompetent and unfit to lead. He even had the audacity to suggest that I had forged my grandfather's letter, that I'd hired a professional to fake the fingerprint. But Rachel was unshakable. She calmly presented the expert forensic report that proved, beyond any doubt, that the fingerprint on the letter belonged to my grandfather. And then she called Maria to the stand. As Maria described my grandfather's final lonely months, her voice trembling with emotion, a hush fell over the entire courtroom. I glanced over at my father, searching his face for any flicker of shame, any sign of regret. But he just stared blankly ahead, his expression unreadable, as if her words were meaningless sounds in the air. The trial dragged on for 3 excruciating weeks. Every day was an emotional and psychological battle. My family's PR machine went into overdrive, planting stories in the tabloids that I was a vindictive son trying to destroy the family legacy out of pure spite. I got anonymous, threatening phone calls from minor shareholders who were still loyal to my father. But something unexpected began to happen. A number of the company's most significant institutional investors, people who had known and respected my grandfather for decades, started reaching out. They were fed up with the company's disastrous performance under my father's leadership, tired of the endless internal power struggles and the constant stream of negative press. Mark helped arrange a series of quiet, off-the-record meetings. I laid out my case to them, not just for the inheritance, but for the future of the company. I convinced them that this wasn't about revenge. It was about saving Vance Renewables, about restoring the vision and integrity my grandfather had instilled in it. Finally, on a gray afternoon in early March, the judge was ready to deliver his verdict. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, the judge began, his voice echoing in the silent room. Including the holographic will of Mr. Arthur Vance, the authenticated forensic evidence, and the credible testimony of multiple witnesses, this court finds that the will filed by Mr. Martin Cross on December 15th is null and void, having been procured through fraudulent means. The court hereby recognizes the holographic will as the true and final testament of the deceased and rules that the 51% ownership stake in Vance Renewables is legally bequeathed to Mr. Leo Vance. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. I just sat there, stunned, the judge's words echoing in my ears. Rachel squeezed my arm, a broad, triumphant smile on her face. "We did it, Leo," she whispered. "We won." I looked over at my family. My father shot to his feet, his face purple with rage, and stormed out of the courtroom without a word. Catherine fixed me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred before turning on her heel and following him. Edward just shook his head in disbelief while Eleanor stared at the floor, a silent admission of defeat. I didn't feel victorious, I just felt empty. A profound exhaustion washed over me and a deep, aching sadness for the final, irrevocable shattering of my family. Afterward, Rachel told me they would almost certainly appeal, but she was confident that given the strength of our evidence, their chances of overturning the verdict were slim to none. I thanked Rachel, Ben, Maria, and Mark, but the person I owed the most to was Sarah. She had been my unwavering partner through every dark moment. That night, I held her and Chloe close, feeling a sense of release, as if I could finally take a full, deep breath for the first time in months. Chloe looked up at me with her big, curious eyes and a sweet, innocent smile. "Daddy," she asked, "does this mean you're a super big boss now?" I laughed and ruffled her hair. "Not exactly, sweetie. Daddy's just trying to make sure he does the right thing." But I could feel it already, the immense weight of what came next settling onto my shoulders. I was now the majority shareholder and chairman of Vance Renewables, a billion-dollar company that was bleeding money and teetering on the edge of ruin. My grandfather had placed his legacy, everything he had ever built, into my hands. I could not, would not, let him down. Walking back into the Vance Tower in Midtown for the first time in 2 years was a strange, disorienting experience. The skyscraper, with its gleaming, stylized V logo, was as imposing as ever. But the energy inside was completely different. The wide, polished hallways, which had once buzzed with the sounds of ambition and activity, were now eerily quiet. The employees I passed hurried by with their heads down, their faces a mixture of fear, distrust, and exhaustion. The company's stock was in free fall. Our most important partners had fled. Our competitors were carving up our market share like a carcass. And internally, the company was fractured, with warring factions still loyal to my father, Catherine, or Edward. I knew I wasn't being welcomed back as a hero. To them, I was an usurper, an outsider who had stolen the throne. The first thing I did was call a meeting of the board of directors. When I walked into that familiar cavernous conference room, I was met with a wall of hostile faces. My father, Catherine, Edward, Eleanor, and the handful of other board members were all there. The tension in the room was so thick you could taste it. It felt less like a business meeting and more like a parley before a battle. My father was sitting in the chairman's seat at the head of the table, his eyes boring into me with undisguised contempt. Catherine offered a tight, artificial smile, but I saw her knuckles were white as she gripped her pen. Edward mumbled something under his breath that I couldn't quite hear, while Eleanor just stared at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. I took a steadying breath, drew myself up to my full height, and began. "I know," I said, letting my gaze travel around the table, "that most of you do not want me sitting in this chair. But I need you to understand that I am not here for revenge. I am not here for power. I am here to do one thing: save this company. I am here for my grandfather, for his legacy, and for every single employee who has dedicated their career to this business." I then proceeded to lay out the unvarnished truth of the company's condition. The hundreds of millions in losses from my father's reckless, ego-driven acquisitions. The major contracts lost because of Edward's abrasive and confrontational negotiating style. The millions wasted on Eleanor's bloated and ineffective marketing strategies. I didn't editorialize, I just presented the cold, hard numbers. I watched their reactions. My father's face reddened with fury. Catherine's lips pressed into a thin, hard line, and Edward finally exploded, slamming his fist on the polished mahogany table. "You really think you can do better than us, Leo?" he snarled. "You're just a spoiled brat who ran away when things got tough." I held his glare, my own voice remaining calm but unyielding. "I didn't run away," I said. "I left because I refused to participate in a culture of backstabbing and self-interest. But I am back now, and I will do whatever is necessary to pull this company back from the brink." I laid out my turnaround strategy. It involved a comprehensive corporate restructuring, which included removing executives who had demonstrated disloyalty to the company's core mission. It meant bringing in a new leadership team and refocusing our R&D on breakthrough technologies like next-generation battery storage. I also announced my intention to hire an experienced professional CEO to run the day-to-day operations, while I, as chairman, would focus on long-term strategy and upholding my grandfather's vision. A few of the independent directors nodded in approval, but my father rose to his feet, his voice shaking with rage. "You think you can just come in here and erase us? Vance Renewables is a family company. It belongs to all of us, not just you." I looked him straight in the eye, a familiar ache tightening my chest. But I did not waver. "This family," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "has been driving it into the ground. If you actually cared about this company, Dad, you would be helping me save it, not fighting me every step of the way." The meeting ended without a resolution, the air thick with unspoken threats. I knew I had just officially declared war, but I had no time for hesitation. I immediately began a series of meetings with the company's key employees, the ones who had remained loyal through the years of chaos and decline. I talked to everyone, from the senior engineers to the administrative assistants, and I quickly realized that they hadn't just lost faith in the leadership, they had lost all hope for the future. A few days later, I gathered everyone in the company cafeteria. I didn't wear a suit, I didn't have a prepared speech. I just stood in front of them and spoke from the heart. "I know you're exhausted," I said. "I know a lot of you probably think this company is finished. But I am standing here today to tell you that we can turn this around. We are going to work together, not just for a paycheck, but for what this company was always meant to be. A force for building a cleaner, more sustainable future for everyone." It wasn't a magic wand, but I could see it in their faces. A tiny flicker of the hope that had been extinguished for so long. I brought in my core team from the Queen startup. They were young, brilliant, and completely unbothered by the toxic internal politics of the past. We worked around the clock, analyzing financials, renegotiating with suppliers, and fast-tracking the development of a revolutionary new energy storage system that was cheaper and more efficient than anything on the market. I spent weeks on the road, flying to Germany, to Japan, to South Korea, meeting with major international tech firms, personally convincing them that Vance Renewables was back and that we were worthy of their trust. Meanwhile, Sarah launched a savvy media campaign that highlighted our renewed commitment to sustainability and corporate responsibility, slowly and steadily rebuilding our tarnished public image. But my family was not going to go quietly. My father and Catherine stubbornly refused to resign from the board, even as the pressure from the other shareholders mounted. They launched a whisper campaign, spreading rumors that I was in over my head, that I was going to run the company into the ground. Edward, I later discovered, was secretly feeding confidential information to one of our biggest competitors, actively trying to sabotage our comeback. And Eleanor, ever the master manipulator, went on a national news program and, with tears in her eyes, lamented how I was callously destroying my grandfather's legacy for my own selfish reasons. They were circling like vultures, just waiting for me to make a mistake, waiting for their chance to strike. One evening, I was working late in my office when there was a soft knock on my door. An older man I vaguely recognized from my early days at the company stepped inside. He was one of the company's original engineers, a man named George, who had worked side by side with my grandfather for decades. "Mr. Leo," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "I was here on day one with your grandfather. He always said that you were the one. He always believed that you would be the one to save this company. Don't you let them get to you. Don't you let them win." George then placed a small USB drive on my desk. It contained, he told me, detailed records of my father's disastrous investment decisions, along with emails that proved Catherine had been siphoning company funds into an offshore account, to build her own personal war chest. "Use this when the time is right," George said, and then he quietly left my office. I sat there for a long time, the weight of the flash drive heavy in my hand. It was a painful realization. Even the people who had been most loyal to my family were now turning against them, not because they were loyal to me, but because they couldn't bear to watch the company they loved be destroyed from within. Armed with this new evidence, I called an emergency meeting of the shareholders. I didn't need to add any commentary. I just put the data up on the screen and let the facts speak for themselves. The reaction from the major investors was immediate and furious. They demanded the immediate resignation of my father and Catherine from the board. My father jumped to his feet, his face contorted with rage, and screamed, "You will live to regret this, Leo." But this time, no one in the room stood with him. Catherine tried to maintain her composure, but I could see the look of final, utter defeat in her eyes. Edward and Eleanor, ever the pragmatists, saw which way the wind was blowing and quietly agreed to step down, though they held on to their minority shareholdings. I didn't push for more. I didn't want revenge, I just needed them gone so I could finally focus all my energy on saving the company. It took 18 months of grueling, relentless work, but slowly, surely, Vance Renewables began to turn around. The stock price started to climb, not in a dramatic surge, but in a steady, confident ascent that restored investor faith. We secured a major strategic partnership with a European energy giant, which allowed us to expand our footprint in Asia, and we successfully launched our new energy storage system, which was lauded by the industry press as a true game changer. I hired a brilliant new CEO, a woman named Priya Sharma, an Indian-American executive with a proven track record of turning around struggling tech companies. Priya brought a level of professionalism and operational expertise that the company desperately needed, which freed me up to focus on my role as chairman, on the long-term vision, on making sure that Vance Renewables would once again be a beacon of innovation and integrity. But this whole ordeal, this whole fight was never just about a company. It wasn't even just about my grandfather's legacy. It was about me. It was about discovering a strength I never knew I had, about finding a way to rise from the ashes of betrayal and build something new. For years, I had held on to a naive, childish fantasy that one day my family would come together, that we would be united. I was so wrong. I learned that my true family wasn't the one I was born into. It was the one I had built, with Sarah, with Chloe, with friends like Mark, with all the people who had stood by me when I had nothing left. I never forgave my father or Catherine or Edward or Eleanor. Not because I was holding on to hate, but because I had to protect myself. I had to protect the new life I had built. I kept my distance, our communications limited to the bare minimum required by corporate law. My father and Catherine disappeared from public life, retreating into a self-imposed exile. Edward and Eleanor seemed to accept their defeat, living out their lives in quiet obscurity. One night I was standing on the balcony of my office, looking out at the endless glittering tapestry of the New York City skyline. And in that quiet moment, I could almost feel my grandfather standing there beside me. I could hear his voice in my memory. And leadership isn't about power, Leo. It's about responsibility. It's about what you build for others. I had done it, not to prove my family wrong, but to prove to him and to myself that I was worthy of the faith he had placed in me. Vance Renewables was no longer just a business. It was a testament to his vision, and a promise that I would spend the rest of my life protecting it. But looking back, I finally understood that this long, painful journey was never just about saving a company. It was about finding my own strength. It was about learning how to stand on my own 2 feet, even with the scars my family had left on me. It was about understanding the profound truth that family isn't about blood. It's about love. It's about loyalty. It's about the people who choose to stand with you in the storm. More than 2 years have passed since I became chairman. Vance Renewables has not just recovered, it has surpassed its former glory. Our stock price is up over 40% from its all-time low. We are signing major international deals again, and our new energy storage system is being celebrated in the tech press as a revolutionary leap forward for the entire renewable energy sector. Priya Sharma, the CEO I brought in, has become an indispensable partner. Her brilliant operational mind turning my strategic vision into tangible results. But none of this was easy. Every single step forward was a fight, not just against market forces or our competitors, but against the long, dark shadows of my own past. And my family, though they were gone from the company, remained a wound that had never fully healed. My father, Richard, now lives in a sprawling penthouse on the Upper East Side, but he's become a recluse. I hear he spends his days on the golf course or at his club, avoiding anyone who might ask him about the company. He sent me a letter once, a long, rambling screed written in a shaky hand. It wasn't an apology, it was an indictment. "You destroyed this family, Leo," he wrote. "You think you're some kind of hero, but you're just a selfish, ungrateful child." I read it, folded it neatly, and put it away in a drawer. I wasn't angry anymore. I just felt a profound sadness for the man he had become, for the fact that he would never understand that my fight was never about defeating him. It was about saving what our grandfather had built. Catherine moved to London, where she now runs a small boutique investment fund. The gossip that filters back to me is that she remains deeply bitter, telling anyone who will listen that I stole the company that was rightfully hers. Edward bought a massive ranch down in Texas and has more or less dropped off the map. Eleanor, ever the survivor, reinvented herself as a high-priced marketing consultant, leveraging her social connections to build a new career. I have no contact with any of them. It's not about hate, it's about self-preservation. It's about accepting the painful truth that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones you need to keep the farthest away. But it wasn't all loss. Through all the darkness, Sarah and Chloe were my anchors, my constant source of light and hope. Sarah's intelligence and her unwavering love were the foundation on which I rebuilt my life. She was there with me through every single moment of despair. From the day I was turned away from my grandfather's funeral, to the sleepless nights during the trial, she has continued her career as a respected environmental journalist, and her incisive, honest articles about the new Vance Renewables were instrumental in helping us win back the public's trust. And Chloe, now 7, is my daily dose of pure, uncomplicated joy. Whenever she draws one of her crayon pictures of superhero daddy standing next to a field of wind turbines, I can't help but laugh. And I think that maybe, just maybe, I'm finally getting something right. Mark is still my best friend, the brother I never had. He wasn't just instrumental in the lawsuit. He was the one who personally vouched for me with key investors. The ones who gave me the support I needed when my own family was trying to destroy me. Maria, my grandfather's nurse, is retired now, living comfortably on Long Island. I send her a gift basket every Christmas, a small token of my immense gratitude. And Ben Carter, the grizzled PI, has become an unlikely friend. He'll stop by my office every now and then for a coffee, and we'll trade stories. Mine about corporate turnarounds, his about the city's dark and hidden corners. But when I look back on it all, I see that this was never just a story about a company or a family feud. It was a story about my own transformation. For so long, I had clung to this idealized image of my family, this fantasy that one day we would all be sitting around a big table, laughing and happy like in some old, faded photograph. I wasted so much of my life trying to earn my father's approval, trying to win over Catherine, trying to prove my worth to Edward and Eleanor. I was so wrong. The family I was born into was never the family I needed. They made their choice. They chose power over love, money over loyalty, rivalry over kinship. And I have finally learned to accept that, not with anger or bitterness, but with a quiet sense of peace. I didn't forgive them for their sake. I let it go for mine. It was the only way to truly be free. My story isn't over because my grandfather's work is never done. Every day I go to my office and I continue the fight, not just to make Vance Renewables profitable, but to make sure that my daughter's generation and all the generations to come inherit a world that is cleaner, healthier, and more just than the one we have now. I no longer look for my family's validation. I don't need their approval. I have Sarah, I have Chloe, and I have the enduring power of my grandfather's faith in me, and that is more than enough to carry me forward.